Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the webinar this afternoon. We'll just give folks a minute to join us, and then we'll get started. Really good to have you with us. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We're just going to have another 30 seconds or so. Is anyone else who's going to come and join us, and then we'll make a start. Okay, let's get ourselves underway. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar, where we'll be sharing some of what we've learned from research and practice about expanding access to high quality training and development. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Pete Gandon. I'm the head of programs at the National Institute of Teaching in the South and West region. I'll be hosting the webinar today alongside a number of colleagues who will introduce themselves and their lovely wintry backgrounds as we move through the session. I'd like to start with a brief overview of a bit of who we are at the NIT and what we're aiming to achieve. The NIT is founded from 4 multi-academy trusts across the country. They are Star, Oasis, Outward and Harris Federation. The 4 multi-academy trusts serve approximately 200 schools across the country. They serve a range of communities, including some of the most disadvantaged. The trusts operate a number of schools across different ages and phases and settings. And we're also supported by a really important network of associate colleges from across the 4 different regions too. Our vision at the NIT is of a school system that nurtures the talents of teachers and leaders at all stages of their careers, from initial teacher education through the early career framework, NPQs and beyond as well. And that's so that they can provide children with the excellent education that they're entitled to and that they deserve. Our mission is to improve the quality of teacher and leader development at a system level. And one of the ways in which we're moving towards that goal and that mission is by generating and interpreting research and being able to apply its insights to the design and delivery of our programs, but also doing some important work engaging with the sector too. Just to expand a little bit on that final point for a moment, bringing research and practice together is a bit of what we're doing through this webinar this afternoon. And we're on a journey with that area of our work and ensuring that those 2 elements talk to each other and have an important interplay. We're learning as we go, and part of this afternoon is new to us in terms of presenting bits and pieces to yourselves from the research team, but also program team as well. It's a space for learning and reflection, and it's about sharing insight and expertise. And as much as anything else, it's about gaining and sharing insight from others in the sector who are working through similar challenges and delivering programs similar to ourselves as well. Today, we're going to be exploring our experiences of designing and delivering across different programs. We're going to focus specifically on 2 research projects as we move through this afternoon. In terms of an agenda, we've got a number of colleagues on the call today who are going to be talking you through various different parts of research and program delivery. We hope in this webinar, which we hope will be the first of a series of these, again, we'll have a chance to explore those relationships between research findings and program delivery too. I've mentioned it already, please be patient with us. We're navigating different members of the team, so if there's little hiccups as we go and transfer between us, then do bear with us on that front. We hope to be able to share some of our learning and reflections and to provide a space for you to share your reflections and insight with us too. I'm just going to make a quick note here before we get on to the next little part, which is the Q&A function is available through the webinar. So if you've got questions that you think of or would like to ask as we go through, please do add them in using that function. And then towards the end, we'll have a chance to hopefully provide some answers or have some space for discussion as well. So in terms of the theme that we're going to be looking at today, We think the theme of expanding access really matters. We want teachers and leaders, regardless of where they work, to receive the best professional development. We've been encouraged to explore this theme, especially links to our own experience and also that of our associate college partners and others as well. Some of those folks have highlighted some of the potential challenges and their impact. We know lots of schools, trusts and other organisations are working really hard on similar challenges too, and we hope that we can contribute to some of the discussion and dialogue. In terms of what those challenges might be, more specifically, firstly, one of them might be relating to the challenges of geography. And we know that in some parts of the country, some schools aren't necessarily as blessed with a strong, really local network of schools, and having easy access to local expertise and exemplification of practice isn't necessarily quite as straightforward. Linked to that theme, linked to that first point, is potentially also a challenge of having access to training and development that's relevant to a specific local context and can be kind of flexible and responsive to local need too. One opportunity we've explored that we'd like to share with you now is the use of virtual visits, and my colleagues Jo and Lydia will take you through a bit of the detail about what we've put into action and some of what we've learned along the way. So Lydia, over to you for this next bit.
Thank you very much, Pete. And hi, everyone. My name is Lydia Limperis. I'm a research fellow here at the National Institute of Teaching, working very closely with the IT faculty. And as Pete mentioned, at the NIOT, we care a lot about expanding access to our IT and NPQ provision. So we have introduced virtual visits as a way of expanding access to these programs. And for this webinar, we thought that it might be helpful to begin with a bit of an overview of what these visits involve in each context, before we then go on to share some key lessons from both research and practice that we have learned along the way. So we start with IT. And then we will move on to NPQs, and specifically we are sharing learnings from our experience designing and delivering virtual visits over this and last academic year. And we're also sharing some of the findings of a randomized control trial research project in ITE that we conducted last year. So we'll start with IT and then we will move on with NPQs. So at the National Institute of Teaching, all IT trainees take part in full-day school experience visits as part of the intensive training and practice modules, where they have an opportunity to see the theory in action by observing expert practice in real time and sort of reflecting on how to apply key strategies such as effective questioning and scaffolding in their own classrooms. These visits are delivered via virtual live streaming, whereby trainees observe schools from across the country, all while on campus with tutors present to guide and support their reflections and critical analysis, both during but also after the observation. So in order to understand more about the kind of effective ways to deliver intensive training and practice, those modules, both for our provision, but also to share with the sector, we also explore this in our research. And what we wanted to understand was specifically the relative effectiveness of virtual versus in-person modes of delivery, but also how to learn how to make the most of either format. And to answer this question, we conducted a mixed methods randomized control trial. Oops, sorry, I should have moved here. Sorry. So hopefully this has moved for everyone now. So to answer this question, we conducted a mixed methods randomized control trial in 2 of our campuses. You can find out more about the research that we conducted in the report that's available on the NIOT website. But essentially, in terms of the findings that emerged from this piece of research, we found that virtual visits were no less effective than in-person visits. And that was in terms of key training outcomes that we tested, including their understanding of theory, their self-efficacy, and also their readiness to apply strategies in practice. However, what was interesting was that qualitative findings suggested that the two formats actually worked quite differently, and each format of delivery came with its own sort of unique challenges and opportunities, which we will come to in a second. But first, I am going to hand over to my colleague Jo, who is going to give a bit of an overview about the NPQ programs. Jo, over to you.
Thanks, Lydia. I'm Jo Facer. I'm the head of the NPQ faculty at the National Institute of Teaching. So I'm going to just share with you some of our learnings on the NPQ virtual visits. And so with the virtual visits for these programs, we knew that it was really key to not just show great provisions, which you do want to do. You do want leaders to go in and see some of the best schools in the country virtually, but also to get that narration right, because we can all visit a phenomenal school, but if you don't know how it happened or how it was made, it's very hard to then go back to your own context and implement any kind of improvements. And so we really focus on getting leaders of brilliant schools in a position where they can talk about what they did and what they continue to do and what they will do in the future to make their schools so good. And it's focused on learning and provision. It's not like a school tour. It's not like, oh, isn't the library lovely? Isn't the gym lovely? Because again, these things, lots of schools and provisions in the country don't have the ability to just install a nice new gym. And that's not what makes great learning anyway, is it? So we're focusing on the things that leaders can do in any school to make it better for children. And like all my colleagues have said, that this is accessible nationwide. We know we have colleagues across the country who have extremely busy day jobs in schools, and they don't want to be doing a 5-hour round trip to go and visit some great schools. But if you can just drop in for an hour or two during the busy school day and not have to travel physically to be there, that just opens up some of these wonderful schools to just be admired and understood by more colleagues in the profession. So I'm going to go through some of the kind of things we've learned about how to prepare these visits. And like, definitely, if you've been a participant on our programs, the early visits we were working this stuff out. We were trying to work out how best to show the school in the way that participants could then really understand the school. And supporting schools to host effectively is really important because you want those colleagues to feel like they are showing their school at its best, but also what they don't have is sort of 3 days of time to give us. So we have to make sure we're working around the school itself has to run. So, you know, we've done rehearsals where the key person can't be there because they absolutely had to be in that managed move meeting, for example. We have to work around that. So sometimes we do a very odd rehearsal where, you know, in the evening time, we sort of pretend that we've seen something so we can make sure they feel really prepared, but that we're not taking them away from the really crucial work they're doing in their school. Narration is absolutely key, and it's so fascinating because what we are doing is we're working with some phenomenal leaders. That doesn't necessarily mean they can always explain first time why they're doing what they're doing or how. And it's interesting because in some of the very best provisions we visited, you are seeing leaders who have been in post for 10 years, 15 years, and it's really hard for them to articulate what they're doing because it just is the way they do things. And so when we kind of meet with those leaders, it's sort of about listening to them tell us their story and then sort of asking the questions that we would have as participants, like, well, how did you do that? Was it always like that? And how did you get people on site, and getting them to really unpick the actions they've taken in such a way that they can make that really understandable for others. With our NPQ programs particularly, although we do show participants classrooms, of course, we think it's really important to see the learning. We also know that schools and the things that leaders are interested in doesn't begin and end with the classroom. So we work with the schools to identify what makes them special. So some schools, for example, we went to an amazing school in Morecambe where they wanted to show us what they do in lunchtime, they have like this whole year group, amazing set piece in lunchtime where they do some recall testing with the children, and then they do a lineup, and then they go to their classrooms. Because actually for leaders in schools, you do want to see and understand lineups and the canteen, and you want to understand line management meetings. We've seen line management meetings, we've seen SLT meetings, and really it's really fascinating, because when we meet with schools, we don't say you could do these things. We just say what makes your school special, and we can leave it to those leaders to identify the amazing practice that is happening in their schools that we then showcase through these visits. Technical aspects are really important, because you can go to the best school in the country, but if if the Wi-Fi doesn't work, no one can see anything. So even though it feels a bit like not the fun, exciting thing to focus on, we do spend quite a lot of time making sure that the devices work and that people have microphones. So, for example, in that big dining hall, we had one member of staff with 180 children, and we needed to work which microphone we put on her to make sure that we could definitely hear her, but we could hear the children, and so on and so forth. And so we do a lot of technical rehearsal to make sure we can have an optimal experience for everyone who comes. And then finally, but probably most importantly, is the safeguarding principles. We are, as an education focused organisation working with schools, we have to make sure safeguarding absolutely comes first. We work with schools really closely to ensure that we are narrating the right way for colleagues to treat these visits, and what to do and what not to do, to make sure that all the children, the most important people in our system, are fully safeguarded throughout the process. And so during the visit and after the visit, just a little bit more information. We have that narration for not just the what, but the how. And that's really important. I think for IT, it's especially important to narrate what, because if you're a novice teacher, you're not always sure what you're seeing. So you can see a great classroom, but if you have a person picking out, do you see the way that she asked the question this way, and he got them to put their hands down at this point, and he went over to this child for this reason? So that narration really unpicks what they're seeing. And we do that for NPQs as well, but we have a lot more, like I say, narration around the how. So did you notice that this was good? Well, this is how we did it, and this is the journey we've been on. And with our IT provision, we have tutors make sure that they are in that virtual visit as well. So they are able to guide their trainees so they can understand and analyse what they're seeing in a way that makes most sense to their learning. The other thing that is important for our IT visits is the hooks for lesson content. It's really hard if you're a trainee teacher to just be plunged into a lesson that might be a subject or a year group that you don't teach, and giving them something to kind of hook onto, like a lesson plan or a PowerPoint or some material. So if children are doing a worksheet, making sure they can see that as well has been really helpful for trainees to get the most out of that visit. And for NPQs, we know that it's not like a video, it's not like a movie. We go and watch the school for a few hours. We have to make it really interactive. So we have points during the visit where we will send participants to breakout rooms with a pertinent question that they can discuss with colleagues, to really start to chew over what they're seeing, to think about what is applicable for them, what they're liking, what they want to bring into their leadership. Maybe also sharing. Sometimes some visits we have these great opportunities where participants go into breakout rooms and they share similar practices, and again, it's just widening people's understanding of all the great, amazing things that are happening in schools in this country, by getting them to work together. And again, with the NPQs, you get participants in breakout rooms from across the country able to share their contexts and their learnings together to get the most out of these visits. And finally, we make sure we have an opportunity at the end for participants to reflect on what they've learned. And we are definitely still iterating that and still working out the best way for them to do that. To make sure that they are getting the most out of the visits, and they are really able to, I guess, go back to their home provision and improve things for the very important children that they are serving currently. And am I handing back to you, Lydia?
I think I'll take it back at this point.
I think sorry to
Pete. That's all right.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks ever so much, Joe, and thanks, Lydia, too. And just to add an extra little reflection at this point, only just a few weeks ago, we had a live virtual visit as part of the IT programme for ITAP, hosted by a wonderful school in Birmingham. And at that point, trainees from across regions, across different parts of the country were able to engage in a really rich opportunity. as has been described, with deconstructed practice that perhaps wouldn't be so easy in terms of geographical location to go and access in their immediate vicinity. Great, thanks so much, Joe and Lydia. We're going to move next on to think about a programme relating to ECF. And for that, my colleague Roisin is going to take us through some information about contextualising the ECF. So Roisin, over to you.
Thanks, Pete. I'm Roisin Ellison, a research fellow in the Research and Best Practice team at the National Institute, and I'll be talking to our second theme in this webinar, which is ensuring relevance for local contexts. And we'll be considering how we're exploring this in the early career framework. So last year in our programmes, what did it involve? With regard to our programmes, we delivered to nearly 2,000 ECTs. We delivered across England in our campuses in the Northwest, the Southwest, Northeast and Southeastern London. Lots of online sessions as well. And as you can see from this quote, they were found to be innovative and engaging curriculum content in the live sessions and supportive contextualisation, loving the commitment to research as well. So for our research project from last academic year, we looked at how schools in rural and coastal communities were delivering the ECF and how it could be better met by the needs of these schools. So national evaluations have started to consider ways to support schools with delivering the ECF. And we found it was important to think about how to make it easier to implement. One aspect of that was contextualisation. So we worked with some of our delivery partners, DRET and SWIFT, as well as research advisory group members who were in areas where we were doing the research, as you can see on the map. So just a real quick thanks to them, DRET, SWIFT and members of our RAG for their support with this research project. So what were the findings? We found some schools were using the ECF materials flexibly, and we know that this is something that's important to people with the ECF, so it can be contextualised. Schools talked about really valuing the overall structure and how all of the content was helpful, but they liked to be able to draw on it in the order that was useful to them and felt suited to their school. So another point was around specific modules for a school's context. For example, in this quote, you can see from one school with very high SEND and EHCP numbers, it was helpful to have the modules on these topics earlier so it could be more tailored for their setting. Programme content also should be carefully staged and balanced flexibly with consistency. It may be helpful to provide guidance on how to use materials flexibly without compromising learning. Other findings included ECTs mentioning how it would be helpful to have certain modules up front when they first start in their school. And from this quote, you can see around information on mental health and teacher wellbeing being front-loaded in that first half term. And then finally, thinking about ECT baseline assessments, leading to that flexible and tailored approach. So what does this mean for the ECF programme? With this in mind, we've been feeding these research findings into our programme refinements. So we'll be sharing a few of these here now, and we really hope that they're helpful, and we'd like to hear more from yourselves in the discussion later. So this year, there will be more opportunities for networking with peers, ECT diagnostics and reflections to identify key development priorities. So that's considering the individual strengths of the ECTs and gaps, increased flexibility with personalised pathways for ECTs and their schools. So opportunities here as well for personalised professional development, and then increased focus on subject and phase-specific contextualisations with some seminars grouped by subject and phase. I'll now hand back over to Pete to wrap up this section.
Great, thanks so much, Roisin, for that. At this point, we're going to pull together some of the threads and some of the themes that have come through from those previous parts of the webinar. As we've moved through the session, we've unpacked a little bit of how different approaches that we've taken have helped us to expand access and potentially overcome some of the barriers and challenges. So we found, to pull some of those themes together, technology can be a powerful tool. Joe mentioned earlier that the setup is really important, and getting the tech to work for you is a key element of getting that right. We've talked a little bit about modes of engagement and adaptation to match context. We've talked a bit about personalized pathways, about order of access and flexibility in that regard too. what also has been shared, I hope, is a bit of the space that we've had to have for reflection on our practice and our delivery and how things have evolved and changed for us over time. And we've certainly learned a number of things along the way about how to use various different tools and approaches. In terms of what's next for us, we continue to develop our programs, of course, and reflect on what might be next in terms of supporting some of those bits of contextualization and personalization. We've got a number of active research projects that will, of course, feed into our own program development, but also the wider sector too. We're continuing to learn how to bring research and practice together. And of course, really importantly, the reason why we're here today is to share findings with the wider sector and that really important goal of being useful and supporting dialogue and discussion with other colleagues and partners as well. I'm going to, at this point, hand over to my colleague Katie, who's going to lead us in our next session in terms of Q&A and some space for discussion. So over to you, Katie.
Great, thank you, Pete, and thank you, colleagues, for sharing the research that we've been taking forwards with the NIOT. And I think it's really important at this point for colleagues who've joined the webinar this evening, just to acknowledge that what we've done there is just give you a little bit of a taster of some of the things we've been doing and some of the really high level findings. And what we want to do now is to provide some opportunity to gather some of your feedback, but also for you to ask questions, perhaps where you feel like you might like to know a bit more detail about any of the projects, anything about the findings. We really welcome your challenge as well. The research colleagues in the room always want to know more about what they can do to improve the research or to take that forwards at the next steps. So there are some questions on the screen now to kind of promote discussion or to prompt some thoughts from you. So first of all, we'd really like to know if there's anything there that resonates with your experience. Is there anything there where you feel like, actually, do you know what, that would really work, or I'd like to try that? Equally, if there's something you found surprising or which doesn't match with your experience, is contrary to something that you found in perhaps your own research or in the organisation in which you work, we'd really like to know that, because sometimes having those case studies can be just as useful. Anything that you might take away, something that perhaps you might consider trialling or implementing, but absolutely, as I said at the beginning, we'd really welcome any questions from you if you'd like to know more. And equally, if you feel like there are some topics that we should be focusing research on in the future, we'd love to know that too. So I'm going to pause for a moment now and welcome questions using the Q&A function, which you'll find if you're on your laptop or on a computer screen. You'll find at the top of your Teams window, and you should be able to post questions in there. I will then pose those to the panel so that they can try to answer those live as best possible. If we don't know the answer to something or there's something we can take away, then we'll try our best to get that information back to you. Equally, if you want to make any comments, please do use that function. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you'll find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So I'll just pause now for a moment to allow colleagues to gather their thoughts, post any questions that you might have, and then we'll do a bit of a Q&A session with the panel and with the researchers that we have here today. Okay, thank you, Matthew, for kicking us off. It always takes a bit of bravery to be the first person to post a question. So Matthew says, just for the benefit of everyone who's in the webinar, I know you might not be able to see the Q&A. Matthew's commented that he is especially interested in our work on narration. Have you developed any protocols or tips for helping leaders to do this well? I think this is an important part of bringing NPQ content alive. I think possibly, Joe, this might be something that you could start us off on, if you wouldn't mind.
Very happy to. Thanks, Matthew. So as you might expect, being a professional development organisation, we run professional development on virtual visits, and I'd say 80% of that session is on narration. So we use a see it, name it, do it model, which you might be familiar with, whereby they watch a clip of some of our strongest narration as identified by ourselves, but also by previous participants as something that was really clear. They see it, they talk about what makes it strong, and then they have to script a bit of their narration themselves. They practice it in pairs, and then they come back and they do it. So we do invest a lot of time in practicing it. When we do a virtual visit run through, we normally do a good chunk of that on narration, and it's very bespoke. So for example, head teachers normally do the first 5 minutes and they set the scene for their school. I don't think we have ever needed to hear more than 20 seconds of a head, because the head teachers do that. They explain what their school is probably multiple times a day. So they're used to that. We don't kind of waste people's time. But what people are less used to doing is, for example, talking about how they planned their line management meeting and why they asked the questions they asked. So unpicking the things they don't talk about as often is the thing we focus on in the rehearsal. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jo. That was really clear for me. Matthew, if there's any follow-up question, please feel free to continue to post in the Q&A. A slightly different topic now. So moving to ITT. So Lydia, I think this question is probably coming to you. Russell asks, what methodological approach did you take towards assessing the impact of virtual visits on trainees?
Thank you, Russell. And yes, very happy to talk about all things methodology and research, methodology and trials. What we did grapple a little bit with the right approach to measuring the impact of the relative impact of the virtual visits. As part of this research, we did consider kind of the ethical implications. But we had a very useful format in the sense that so every trainee experienced both formats. And that is something that was really important to us, because at the time, we were trying to understand whether by switching to a virtual format, what are the implications of that on trainees? Could we potentially be disadvantaging some trainees? There were a lot of questions on our minds. But the methodology that we use, the approach that we use for the randomized controlled trials, essentially we use a crossover parallel group design, whereby every trainee was randomized to attend the school visit either virtually for the first ITAP module or in person. And then for the next ITAP module, they would do the opposite. So by the end of the 2 modules that we looked at as part of the trial, every trainee participating in the research would have experienced both formats, just in a different order. So that allowed us to look at differences at the within kind of participant level as well. And I can say more if that's helpful, Russell, but you will be able to find more information as well in our protocol, which is available on the website and the research page, but also the summary report. But do let me know if you have any follow-up questions, or if there are any colleagues that would like to add anything to it.
Thank you, Lydia. Really helpful. And it's very tricky sometimes when we don't know the context of colleagues who are joining webinars to make sure we give the right level of detail. But please do get in touch with us if there's anything else you'd like to discuss, Russell. Really interested conversation. A really interesting question here from Catherine, which, so to give some context, so thank you, Catherine, for providing this. What she said is, in terms of aspects that resonate, I'm part of a group looking at remote feedback and building/maintaining a relational tone, social constructivism, for those of you who are familiar. Have you got any underlying principles agreed around this, i.e. the tone and language used when you are building relationships remotely? And I think it might be best, Ellen, perhaps to start this conversation, but I'm happy for you to defer to any other member of the panel.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. My name's Ellen. I'm the Head of Evaluation and Observational Research at the NIOT. I was going to suggest this question going to Jo, but I'm not sure if you're happy to take it, Jo. So, yeah.
I'm super happy. And if you're interested in anything to do with like online delivery, I couldn't recommend this book more. Doug Lamov's Teaching in the Online Classroom. So he wrote it during lockdown, and so much of it is so useful when you're trying to deliver online professional development. He has this incredible way when he delivers online training of making everyone feel accountable, but also it's very warm. So I'd say, like, just generally what we do with virtual visits particularly, we have to make sure that the chat is a really safe space, and that people are remembering, as you know, with social media, same with virtual visits, where you can't see people's faces and you're hidden behind a screen. So we always start the visit by reminding everyone in the virtual room that this is a school, it's real people, it's real children, they're working incredibly hard, and we have to sort of treat the practice we see with the respect that we would have if we were there in person. So we kind of try and build those norms. We make sure that we set up questions. So there's no like gotcha questions. There's no putting people on the spot. There's no cold calling, but just trying to make sure that you're using a range of ways to get people to contribute safely, because when you're just meeting people for an hour or 2 hours at a time, that's not the time to shame people or say you got that wrong. It's the time to build that sense of community. So we would never have high stakes questions. It would always be reflective questions, to which there's not really a wrong answer, sort of, but at least it's not the forum to be doing that. But I would definitely recommend Teaching in the Online Classroom as a starter guide. We're going to do a lot more work on this, I believe, as an institute, because I think it's a really exciting space, the online professional development space.
Thank you, Jo. And sorry, Ellen, for putting you on the spot there. So we have a really lovely comment from Christina here, which is that increased subject specificity was mentioned when we were talking about the ECF Rural and Coastal project. A question, or perhaps a suggestion here, which I think is a really helpful one, is that there could be opportunity to collaborate with subject hubs on developing this. So working with maths hubs as an example, a possibility to research the impact of collaboration on development of subject or indeed phase specificity. I'm not sure if colleagues want to comment any more on that, but I'm very happy to say, just from my role, that in terms of developing subject specificity, we've been working with lots of specialists and experts around the country in order to look at how we can improve content and to develop those very expert-led sessions that are rooted in the framework itself, but that contextualize that in kind of in the frame of the subject or the phase, and then they are facilitated also by specialist leaders or teachers in those particular areas. And of course we do lots of due diligence about who those colleagues are and where they come from. But I think that this is something that maybe is untapped, and the research into it is really interesting and has a lot of potential. One thing we don't know yet is the impact of running the programme with subject and phase specific elements in comparison to if we don't. We know that ECTs really appreciate it and that schools would like more of that. However, what the impact is of doing so is perhaps something that would be really useful to know about a little bit more. Very happy for any member of the panel to jump in on that if there's anything more to add.
Yeah, just to add that we work with the Maths Hub, for example, with their NPQ and leading primary maths, and the ones that we've worked with have been incredibly helpful in signposting us to brilliant schools with great maths practice, and we're super grateful. We're always looking out for fantastic practice in great schools, and the hubs are a really amazing resource for that.
Thanks, Jo. Okay, and colleagues, our next question comes from Martin, who says, thinking about teacher retention and the data that shows the largest demographic leaving the profession are females between 30 and 40 years old, maternity being cited as the key issue in driving this. Maternity teacher or paternity teacher are maternity teacher, paternity teacher are one of a few organisations researching ways to address this through coaching programmes, as an example. More work is needed in this area. So what Martin's asking is, what role could NIOT play in this key national issue impacting on teacher retention? It may be that we don't have an answer for this yet, but something for us to consider. And please don't apologise, Martin. It's a great question. It's a really pertinent, extremely important topic, and something that we're very much interested in. So certainly, though it may not be in the current remit of what we're doing, it's certainly something we want to hear and say more about. And Joe's going to jump in.
It is absolutely, and we're talking to NTPT. We've had a few conversations with them, and we're working on what's the best way to support that mission that is just being so expertly held in that space. Really, really exciting research, and I love the report that they published earlier this year. So it's definitely something that, especially in the NPQ space, we think a lot about retention. I guess when you think about IT, you're thinking more about recruitment, but our role is very much around how can we keep great people in schools for the long term. And you're absolutely right to point that out. So it's definitely something that as a faculty, we're doing some work with that organisation specifically, but also some work more generally around retention. I don't know if anyone from research has also had those conversations with Emma.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, I'm happy to pitch in a little from the research team side. And I also just want to echo Katie and Jo and say thank you so much for this question. This is such an important one. And I think, I've just been reflecting on what the role of the NIOT is in this, and we certainly would want to play a role in this. I think this is a really, really important area, particularly in looking at the research around teacher training and development and teacher learning and how that can support if and the ways that it can support with this issue. I think one of the ways in which the NIOT research is kind of in the long run will hopefully be able to contribute to this is the work that we're doing around building kind of large scale research infrastructure. So one of those is the teacher education data set, which we're building, or colleagues, I say we as if it's not me, colleagues are building at the moment, which is collating data from the 4 founding multi-academy trusts, and then will be kind of extended, or is at the moment, into the associate colleges that we work with across the country. And essentially that data set is a really exciting way to look at pupil outcomes and teacher outcomes as well, and see what routes into teacher training and what opportunities for development and learning those teachers have had, and how that's impacted some key outcomes, including retention. So that infrastructure is one possible way that we can play a role there. And also colleagues are also building a portal doing on the back of a large meta review that was done into teacher training and development and key teacher outcomes as well. So that's another kind of larger piece of research infrastructure. And in terms of evaluation research, at the moment, we are doing research primarily alongside our programme specifically, but we're building a bank of really important questions like this. So we're starting small, as you can imagine, and then really thinking about how in the future we review this every year and ask what questions we want to answer in the sector through our research. So yeah, this is absolutely a really key one. And so just want to say thank you so much for other colleagues as well suggesting research in the chat. This really goes into our discussions for future research, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Ellen and Jo, and all of the colleagues who've presented this afternoon. There are no other questions at the moment from colleagues who've joined the webinar. So I'm just going to move forwards. If any come in the meantime, or you miss an opportunity, or you'd like to get in touch with us, I'm going to share how you can do that in just a moment. If you'd prefer not to do that in a public forum, we'd still really love to hear from you. I know we have colleagues from lots of different organisations joining us this afternoon. So it's left with me to say a huge thank you to everyone who made this research possible and continues to allow the National Institute of Teaching to carry out research in the sector and answer some of those really important questions, and to be able to consider what we ask next and what we find evidence on next. So of course all of the colleagues who are on the screen now, but our research participants, of course, without them this would be impossible. If you'd ever like to be part of our research, as I say in just a moment, I'll share how you can do that, and we would really welcome any approaches, whether that's to do with joining groups to help advise our research, whether that's to suggest schools where we can find great practice, to provide case studies or whatever it might be, but also our network of associate colleges who are our partners who have allowed this research to take place, some of whom we named earlier on in the ECF section. The DFE who enable us to do some of this research, our study collaborators, Swift and Duret, and our research advisory groups with whom we would not be able to drive any of this research forwards, and they are absolutely invaluable. So thank you to all of those publicly. And importantly, we'd really like to hear from you, and we would also really like you to be able to be kept informed. So if you prefer not to have an interactive discussion, but you just want to hear about what we're doing, please do scan the QR code that's on the screen now. And we will make sure that we keep you up to date on our research, whether that's publications, whether that's what's coming next, or whatever it might be. Or please do email our research inbox at the address that's on the screen now, and one of our colleagues from the research team will pick that up and get back to you, whether that's about this webinar, about something else, about something you think about over the break. We'd love to hear from you. And finally, just a huge thank you for all of you joining us this afternoon. We know it's an extremely busy time of year, as it always is, and that it's dark now, and that you'll all be looking forward, hopefully, to a lovely break over the next few weeks and a relaxing evening. Thank you all very much, and we hope to see you again soon.